Janady, a great engineer from UiPath. So UiPath, not only just a sponsor, but obviously doing some pretty amazing stuff in the industry right now. At testing talks, we need our sponsors, but I always insist that any sponsors, if you have a speaker allocation or you push hard for a speaker to support the event, we don't want salespeople. We don't want CEOs. We don't really want those types of people unless they've done incredible things in the industry. Janady's a great example of that. Janady's an engineer. He's done some amazing stuff in the space of artificial intelligence, but before that in the world of engineering, obviously with AI still being relatively new. But he's also a leader in the Agentic AI space, which is where UiPath are really trying to position themselves and in their endeavours try to become an absolute market leader. So without further ado, over to you, Janady. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks, Cam. And thanks, everyone, for being here despite the weather this morning. And it's a privilege and a pleasure to be here. I think it's our first time sponsoring the event. I was here last year just manning the booth, supporting one of our partners. But it's great to see this testing community. I purposely put the title so in terms of agentic test orchestration. There is no mentions of AI, Gen AI, LLM in my title, just to see if anyone turns up. Luckily, you guys all are here today. It is going to be a combination of where things are today, the challenges of many enterprises, looking at the nature of testing, the traditional ways of approaching testing, the different testing tools and orchestrating them, but also how does AI eventually get into the mix. So it's very, very much happy to be part of this today. And hopefully we have some meaningful discussions and you get something out of it. To begin with, I want to share something on, although it's not an AI talk, a landscape of AI, right? I think the first one that you see on your right-hand side is an AI tooling landscape launched by Sequoia. I think it's one of the first one a couple of years ago. And what the intent here is that it's a very, very crowded space, very crowded market with all the AI tools, some of which you're probably using on a day-to-day basis. Most of us are using, say, a chat GPT equivalent to do our things in work and outside. But I also want to point out the more recent sort of one of the other landscape from 2025 where I think on your right, we've got the agentic automation and orchestration sort of quadrant where UiPath is being one of the tools that leads in that area as well. And why is that important? Because in the world of AI and automation, orchestration is important. I'll get to that in a second, and how that applies to testing in particular. About AI tools, we're here to talk about testing. You can also see that there's tens, 20, maybe hundreds of tools out there if you start drilling into the different kind of landscape, the different tools specifically to do manual testing, what are the tools that uses AI, test management tools, and things like that. So again, similarly, it's very crowded space. I'm sure there's more than 5 to 10 tools in many enterprises, and in larger banking and insurance customers I work with, there's more than 20, right? And these statistics come from some of the leading analysts and consulting firms, basically talking about the impacts of AI in organizations. This comes from our background from UiPath in process automation. You can see that Accenture talked about the 97% of CXOs understands and believe that AI, or Gen AI in particular, will be very transformative. 67% of executives says that less than 30% of their AI initiative will actually work or scale, right? A lot of them will just die down eventually. And then finally, 25% of executive understands and believe that AI is key for revenue drivers. Now, if we apply that in a testing world, it's not very much different. Most of you would know, and a lot of the talks today is also going to be about AI and how AI is going to impact testing. We heard about the keynote earlier, how AI will transform how we do testing, how developers and testers are using AI today. So what I want to probably align this with is we know developers are using AI to build faster, develop faster, which means releases are getting faster. How do we apply that into testing, right? How do we catch up? So are we also using the same capability? Are we leveraging the right tools? Are we using AI? What are the bottlenecks in understanding approach to testing in a more advanced and modern way? So that's basically the focus of today. And in many organizations, many large organizations, based on our surveys, there is more than 175 different applications. And we most often than not, we think about applications as the large ERP, CRM, like Salesforce, ServiceNow that you work with, or SAP, but also you have productivity tools such as your Excel spreadsheet, right? Your PDF viewer, your emails, your Slack, your Teams messaging. Every single one of them are tools that basically eventually fits as part of a process. Luckily for us, in testing, there's not that many. There's probably 10 to 20, as the previous slide shows. It, though, back to the question, like, how do we keep up with testing with all these applications? A lot of these AI company releases software tools that your company will adopt and use. How do we test them? How do we make sure that that you are also keeping up with those changes, right? This is what I'm thinking about when I explore the questions of have testing really evolved, right, over the last couple of decades. The fundamental of testing hasn't changed, but the complexity of application has grown. Think of your technology stacks, many of the new modern applications, AI tools out there that's being used by the organizations, microservices, mobile. How do you keep up with all the changes? But it's not only about your testing tools. Usually it's everything that surrounds it. Do you have the right testing strategy in the organization? Do you have the right executive support? Is testing an afterthought, right? How the team structured when they're thinking about delivering value or delivering releases faster? Are you set up in an agile or DevOps way that promotes that continuous development and improvements? There's also, from a testing perspective, there's also a nature of just general software development, where you've got teams sitting in projects, building and testing, being pressured by budget and timelines. So they resort to, yes, not automating, just doing manual testing to get it as fast as possible out the door. There's then the BAU team, who's just maintaining and thinking about regression, who wants to automate, but doesn't get the right sponsorship or budget like the project team usually does. So it's not all about tooling. There's all these other factors that we need to be thinking about. And along the same notes, if we look at some statistics, and this is a survey from a quality index report from Planet that they did last year, that 60% of organizations believe that automations is key, right, to deliver better quality, and that's the best return on investment for their spend. And 40% think that selecting the right tools is also a very, very much critical success factor. So when we look at the statistics, together with the same report also shows the different kind of tools in the market that companies prefers, combinations of open source and paid tools. You're looking at automation tools, performance testing tools, tools with AI, tools to do security and things like that. Market is very crowded, I think, is the bottom line. So one company, multiple different tools, right? And it's more than a dozen in the picture. It's not a real solution logo. I'll let you guess the similarity of the logo if you know your testing tools. But basically, the challenge that we're faced with today is you've got a different, very chaotic landscape, testing landscape, right? Teams get to choose their own tools usually. Hey, I'm responsible to test my web interface. I'll pick my tools, right? I'm responsible for database testing. I'll pick my own tools. API testing team pick their own tools. Very classical problems. So that's fine, and they do the job well within its own boundary. they'll do the system tests, unit tests, system tests, just fine, as you saw earlier from the pyramid in the keynote. But then we also talks about the complications of free versus commercial tools, open source versus commercial tools. What is the actual total cost of ownership? Free doesn't mean free most of the time. You want to think about the cost of maintenance, the cost of maybe skill sets to learn multiple different tools, because you can't just do one tool, you can't just use one open source tool for your entire portfolio. You're limited in terms of, you can do API, but you can't do mobile testing. You can do mobile, but it's limited in web capability. What about microservices? What about desktop application? What about mainframe and legacy application? What about performance testing, right? Every single one of these typically requires you to have multiple different tools. So the problem then becomes, how do we think about making these tools talk to each other? This is the classical problem or quote that we heard. And I, as an ex-developer, I use this all the time as well, that when I try and do a debugging and it works, do a code review and it doesn't, this is what I say, right? It works on my machine, it works on my environment. I don't know why it doesn't on yours. But this is the challenge that we face with system integration testing. Do we really know what's happening outside of our own domain, outside of what we care about, right? What is the upstream scenario? What is the upstream impact that I should be thinking about before it comes to my domain? Before I should be considering what sort of test cases. What happens after? Most often I don't even know what's happening. I don't know which other team are responsible, what they're doing with their test cases, and what are the third-party services surrounding it. And this is me sitting in the middle. As long as my code works, as long as my test pass, everything is fine, right? Everything could be burning around me, but I'm fine. This is the unfortunate situation that many of us are in today. But tools and technology is just one part of the equation, as I mentioned earlier, right? So it's all about environment and data problem. And how many times have we heard about, hey, can you do a data refresh on UAT environment number 3, right? Hey, can you create a user because I don't have a user to test with? Can I get a synthetic data created because my test doesn't work anymore? I can't do any exploratory testing. My environment is down, right? It's a very classical example. So finding a reliable and stable environment is also important. And getting data that's mimicking production data, not production data in tests, is also critical. Because without environment and data, we can forget about test automation, right? There's nothing to automate. So very important considerations. Then there's also a people and process problem. Again, we go back to, you can have the most advanced tools, but if your team structure is not structured the right way, or if you've got very bad legacy processes that prevents you from taking advantage of these tools, then you're not going to get continuous delivery. Right? You're not going to achieve that. So these are all valid problems, and sometimes we don't solve everything with technology. I think we also heard about change management and how we change the mindset and be a thought leader in the space, advising organization leaders to say, hey, testing is not about just picking the right tools. Yes, it's important. It's going to set us forward for the foreseeable future if we pick the right tools. But let's also consider this other factor. And if we think about all of this, what we end up with, to simplify, is that we have automated tests in pockets of the business, right? What we don't have is test automation. So what is it and what can we do? And it's not a new problem. It's just things that everyone here is quite familiar with. If they are ever looking outside of what they're doing, it's a challenge. So it's basically how traditional approaches leading up to last couple of years has been approaching this problem. So a classic one would be, it doesn't work, let's get a new tool, right? Let's buy a new product and hopefully it'll fill the gap. And if you've got different projects thinking about that way, guess what? You'll end up with 5, 10, 15 tools in a couple of years. if that's the organizational mindset, right? So having the right sort of mindset is important. Another solution, another sort of critical mindset also is that buying the most expensive software out there, thinking that it will do everything, solve all your problems from user requirements, test data problem, test environment problems, automating your test cases, looking at test reporting, analysis, analyzing your test defects, fixing your test failures, and all this automatically is not realistic, right? Even if there's a tool out there that can do a lot of those, are we actually set up to capitalize on that, right? Is the organization set up to actually take advantage of all those testing lifecycle capabilities? If we look at how things are done internally, what we can do today, some of the things that you guys, again, or everyone here are already approaching is, okay, we're gonna do a continuous delivery, let's create a pipeline, right? If you're set up in the right approach within the organization, you can do this today. Set up a pipeline, whenever you make a change in your code, test gets kicked off, right? In the specific areas. You get your test reporting, you get your release manager review it, and then you release to production. CI/CD pipeline is great. It does the job for a limited understanding of the ecosystem and the limited functionality that it provides the capability for. Then there's also centralizing the platform or testing platform and also building an in-house framework, right? Let's just build a framework internally. We'll open source, pick a button, so open source, so build a framework, and hopefully it'll fix everyone's problem. Sometimes it works. Other times, not so often. It might just create additional considerations or challenges down the line. But what we've seen with these approaches is that you can actually achieve successes in terms of maybe standardizing some reusable components or libraries in some areas, reporting, for example, and maybe building automation capabilities, right, at a minimum. So your organization now start thinking about test automation in different COE or pockets of the business. So it's great outcomes, and you've probably done this already today. But what I want to present an opposite or challenging views on is that those frameworks, as they grow, could become too rigid to adapt to new technologies. How does the new framework, how does the existing framework fit new technologies to test? I don't know. If you haven't considered mobile or microservices, how do we expand on that, right? Do we have the tools to do that? Do we have to get a new open source? Do we have to buy new tools to fit into the framework? Do we need the testing team? Do we need a testing framework team now to sort of maintain this framework full time? Is it actually enforced? Sometimes framework could become the bottleneck. Then there's also the standardization struggle. So think of, your different tools will have their own environments and test requirements to be able to execute. How they actually report it? Are they reported in, just text file, JSON file? Do they have their own dashboards? How do we consolidate all those test reporting? What are the maintenance needs? What are the skill set that you require to actually maintain all these test artifacts? What are the tests that is actually needed as well, all right? Because if test that always works, it means you're not capturing anything. So testing becomes less of value if you're not capturing any defects in a way. And tooling is great, again, within its own limit, but the coordinations between testing tools is still, is still a challenge. Then there's an AI, right? Now we're going to talk about AI. Get AI into the mix. AI will solve everything for us. Like, let's get a tool that does AI. Let's throw an AI agent to address all these problems. It won't, right? Not at this stage. We have a lot of great capabilities that we can use to improve developers and testers' life. We can build a solid sort of test automation sort of framework leveraging AI in different areas, but it's not going to be a magical solution that just, does everything for you. We'll go into that in a bit more detail. And that's where we're at. So a lot of the broken processes between tools and peoples and environments are still managed manually, right? So if you look at again, some more additional statistics that manual testing is still, or efforts to do testing are still very much manual in a lot of areas. a lot of organizations only achieve, like I think 2 to 3% of organizations achieve automations to replace manual testing efforts, while I think the bottom 30 over the last 2 years, based on this survey, does not have any impact, although they've started automating or haven't automated at all, right? And maybe one additional statistic that will be relevant to here later today is that on your left-hand side, the top one on test failure analysis, right? They're spending a lot of time analyzing test failures. So I'm going to zero in on that to see how we can actually use AI agents to do just that, right? As part of a workflow-driven orchestration for your testing. So the bottom line is that enterprises do not have an automation tools problem. At least it's not something that a tool can just address. What they have is, the challenge today is, how do we make all of these testing tools talk to each other, right? How do we make them work together? So with that, what I'll do is talk about a simple example, a simple loan application process. So it involves, say, 4 largely steps where we've got a browser interface that's exposed out there that a customer can log in and apply for a loan. Go into a website, click, submit the details, and get a loan, approve, decline, whatever, right? First component. Behind the scene, we need to check that whoever submitting or applying for a loan, we need to have a record of that. So an API to check that the backend services or web services is logging that correctly, right? It's logging that correctly via API testing or via API. Then I could be going in and say, hey, I've changed the address, here's my new details, or here's my payslip, here's additional documents that you require. That's a KYC update, right? Just additional documentation. Presumably in a banking scenario, that's happening in their core banking system or in a mainframe, right? Third system. Then the last step is there is also an opportunity or Salesforce, a lead creation in Salesforce so that a loan manager or loan officer can follow up to say, hey, hey Junaidi, your loan is at this point. I'm still, I'm halfway through reviewing it, blah, 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 right? So that also needs to be created and tested. And my demonstration in a little bit, we'll talk about how we're testing with, again, 4 different tools here. Selenium for the browser, web browser testing, API testing with Postman, just kicking off a mainframe testing with UiPath, and then also some API and UI testing, right? We can do API testing. Salesforce provides API, but also user interface testing so that the loan officer who looks at Salesforce can also verify that. Simple functional testing and things like that. That's all good. They're all doing the job, as we saw earlier, right? You're probably sitting in one of these pockets, or hopefully multiple, and you understand this problem very well. So the challenge here is, how do we actually take a data, like think about it from a testing scenario and a customer journey scenario, how do we actually take or create a loan application via a web browser using a subset of test data? I'm a 35-year-old male with this income. I want to apply for this loan of this amount, blah, 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 right? Then another test data. I am a indigenous Australian, 40 years old, living in remote New South Wales. I want to do this X, Y, and Z. What are all those test data that triggers your test cases, right? First of all. But then how do we take those output and then pass it to the second one? Which is, let's verify I've run through the web interface. Let's try the backend, right? Is actually, can I do an API call via Postman to make sure that the loan is created? How do I then trigger a third one to say, hey, okay, based on this, let's go into the mainframe system, check for our customer, and then just update a few different parameters, right? Update the customer details and things like that. And finally, kick off a Salesforce test as well. It doesn't have to be sequential. I'm just demonstrating as sequential. How do we make sure that if I go into Salesforce as part of my test cases, I can find that loan ID as well, right? Every single thing, ideally, is stitched together from a testing scenario. That's a system integration test from an end-to-end sort of user experience perspective. That's basically the challenge I'm going to try and demonstrate today, right? So you can see the challenges on the bottom with redundant different tools, potentially free or paid, but also skill sets combination. Manual bottlenecks, people moving data, take an output from one test, put it in the second one, hit run, take the output, put it in the next one, hit run, things like that. And then also limited visibility. You don't know where things are at, where's the stages, what was test coverage, what is the end-to-end test scenarios, right? So those are some of the challenges that we can see without an orchestration solution, let's say. So what you see on screen now, I think it's a video, is a UiPath sort of orchestration layer in Maestro, where we're attempting to do this, stitching 4 different test cases in a single run, right? So we'll start by kicking off the synthetic data. If you've got integrations or you've got an existing test data sort of management solutions, we can say, hey, we need some test data. If not, let's trigger it, right? But then the first thing that happens is, after that is, as part of your end-to-end test, it kicks off Selenium script. So here, on the main screen, you can see that it's just waiting for that to load. But in the other virtual machine, we're running Selenium script, right? We're just waiting for it to finish as well. So we're just wrapping around a Selenium runner script, waiting it for finish, and then checking, once it's finished, what is the output? Whether that's a command prompt, whether it's a JSON file, whether that's actual reporting, we can go into that, right? Just wrap around Selenium script. What's important is we take the output from the Selenium script and we put it into a test data queue that the second test can pick up, right? So that, as part of the integration, it's not only kicking off and wrapping those tools, it also understanding where things are at and also leveraging the test data. This one is an API script. I'm not putting in any sort of nice little video because it's just API. And the next step is, again, kicking off using the same artifacts, the test loan environment data. It's probably too small to see, but you've got a loan ID and you've got an approval amount, right? And you've got the user email address. How do we again go into mainframe? And this is kicking off this UiPath automation. It's probably just very, very small, but it's basically just going to a mainframe, running through, very manual process that if you don't have a tool today, you'll do this manually. Automate that, stitch that together, do some KYC update, and make sure that it is actually updated, right? Look for a user, update the address, update the documents, and make sure that it's updated correctly. And finally, once this is finished, we also go into the last step, which is Salesforce verification. And by the way, each one of these test cases also publishes the test results automatically into our test management solution, right, within UiPath as well. So this gives this a second to run. And with Salesforce, as we saw earlier, this is a combination of user interface and API automation. User interface is what we bring up here in the browser, just to make sure that we can find the loan. Does it have the right amount? Does it have the right rate quoted and things like that? And also API testing. So API testing just happens in the background. Once it's finished, I think this test takes about 2.5 minutes to complete. And most of this being spent waiting from a UiPath perspective. We're just waiting for it to finish. We're just waiting to read the test results. There's obviously some handoff, but you can imagine how this could be a lot longer if you do this manually, right? So if we then look at what's happening after the fact, right? Because we don't have to see those playing in real time. That could be a scheduled thing, and we can get notified afterwards, right? So what we see here is that we've got 4 different test artifacts, 1 from Selenium, we've got the log files, we've got the screenshot if we wanted, and then here we're just looking at the Postman API assertions. Do we get the right HTTP return code, 200 OK? What about other things that we're asserting on, or the Postman scripts are asserting on? Then a UiPath mainframe automation, right? Again, with whatever assertion and screenshots. And finally, Salesforce. So I hope that paints a picture of how test orchestration can impact testing different tools. Now it begs a couple of questions, and I've got a couple of threes in here as well. So how is this different to what what we're doing today, or outside of UiPath, what are the team doing today, right? How is it different? I think one of the fundamental thing with UiPath that I've seen, and when we talk about customers, or when we talk about this capability with customers, is more flexible in terms of the design. It's more flexible in terms of the wrapping functionality. Behind the scene, you can wrap around not just kicking off a code via command prompt, but also, which is limiting in this a lot of tooling today with scripting, but you can also go into a portal and click on run, right? That's a traditional process automation way, just mimic a human. What are you currently to do manually? We can replicate that to kick off your manual tests. Think about if you've got a tool to test mainframe, how do we kick that off? We can go into your core banking system, we can click on that button and trigger it, right? So it's combinations of flexibility and being able to do it from a user interface that really brings the value out of this. But is it enough to just do those simple integration tests? Now, that will deliver value, and you don't have to start with complex integration tests. You can just make two systems talk to each other very, very simply. But yeah, even with that sort of simple use case with the two enterprise sort of customers that we're talking to, they actually came with us with these exact problems around, we've got north of 10 to 15 different tools. Do you have a solution for that, right? And if you come to me 12 months ago, I would be, yes, but it's very clunky. We don't have an orchestration solution. We can build around a lot of wrappers and then stitch them together in a clunky way, right? But with orchestration, like the orchestration solution, it becomes possible. And before I get into how does it work in the background in a second, it's also important to think about if you can achieve this, automating this as part of your system test into system integration, you can basically try and reuse a lot of these assets for regression down the line, right? Once your project goes live. So that's some of the values that you can bring to the table and say, hey, let's look at automating not just our parts, let's make these 2-3 systems talk to each other as part of a project and timeline that we can fit. And then down the line, when project goes live, when your releases goes to production, that becomes your regression asset, right? So it's not an effort that goes to waste. I think most of us understand the value of automation. It's just that we don't have the luxury to just do automation all the time. Cool. So how does it work? So behind the scene, we've got Test Cloud with UiPath, and we've got a couple of different solutions, one being just a low-code test case wrapper. So here we've got UiPath Studio, which is a low-code tool, and as you can, probably too hard to see, it's just showing how we're calling a Selenium run script, opening a command prompt, typing in a command prompt, because that's how Selenium scripts is run, at least the one that I'm demoing here. And then every time it runs, just monitor the command prompt, right? Every 3 to 5 seconds, check the command prompt, Control A and Control C if you want, right? Check the output. Do we have the status that says running, or do we have the status that says completed? Has the command prompt disappears, right? If it's disappeared, let's go into the results file. So all those flexibilities we can do from like Studio in a low-code manner, and then we can find the relevant assertions that Selenium is doing, bring it in, and then just publish it to Test Manager, as you can see earlier. But we can also do it the hard way, which is a coded test wrapper. We have both approach, low-code and pro-code, or coded. We can write a C# code or VB code, which is more popular in our low-code environment, or C# code in our code environment. We can ask AI, as you all know, built into the product, to say, hey, I need a code. Please, in fact, I generated this code just late last week, I think, because I had a low-code versions working. I didn't have a pro-code version working. So I asked it to please generate me a code that calls a command prompt for a Selenium runner script that uses power argument. It spit out the first, 15 lines, right? Then I kept going on and, hey, please give me a code to do this, right? Yes, I need to fix it. Vibe coding is not the answer, but that's what is helping me as a tester and a developer to speed up building test case and test automation. So that's what's happening behind the scene. Once you sort of wrap it around with UiPath test case, it all integrates well into your test management results at the end of the day, which you can look at and look at the analytics and reporting as well. What I want to add here is pivot into an AI agents work, right? So how do AI agents add into the mix? Obviously, complexity, regulation, security, and so on and so forth. And what I want to demonstrate is one functionality that looks at how AI agents, and if you think about what I mentioned earlier about test failure analysis, that's taking up more than 20% of the time. How does AI agent, how can we use AI agents to test, to analyze the test failures and suggest code fixes, right? It's not impossible to think that AI agent can do that. We know they can analyze code. We know they can generate code. So how do we approach that? So here we've got a UiPath agent builder, where I'm just building a test failure analysis agent. On your left-hand side, you see some input parameters, like here's the test failure, because if the test fails, we can capture the test failure. Here's a repository, like GitHub repository, for example, and here's the file path, right? Go and check out the code, go and analyze the code, understand the test failure, and tell me what's wrong. So we're building a simple prompt here, system prompt, your test failure analysis agent. Here's some instruction. Here's your user prompt that changes, right, depending on its execution, the test failure, the code, and things like that. And then we're giving it a bunch of different tools, right? The tools for GitHub to create a branch, to check out code Confluence probably, to understand your coding best practices, and Jira to look at historical defects, things like that. Give it tools and your agent becomes super powerful, right? And on the right-hand side, you've got your agent's health score as well. It basically looks at what's the clarity of your prompts. Do you give it enough tools? Does it need more testing? And the biggest factor for this health score is that I don't have any test set, right? So it's a very easy way for us non-AI or data scientists in the room to be able to test and understand whether your AI agent is effective. And when we deploy and when we run this with a predetermined input on the right-hand side, here's a code that you checked out. Here's a test failure. The LLM behind the scenes is going to do a lot of this analysis. And what's going to be super interesting for us is looking at this code, the failure analysis, and also the recommendation, right? In this case, it's too small to see, but basically, based on the code analysis, it has about 10 to 15 seconds wait, depending on where things are from an element detection perspective. And it's got an error that times out, right? Couldn't find element within the reasonable timeout period. So what's recommended are a few things, right? Maybe the element has disappeared from the screen. You need to fix that. Maybe you need to increase the timeout, right? So it gives you a few of the suggestions. So what we can further extend this simple test failure analysis agent is kick off another or build another small agent that all it does is recommend code changes, right? So here's the code, here's 5 recommendations, make the change. I've already tested it with all the leading LLM, and most of them will be able to tell me, here's the before and here's the after, right? Most of them will be able to tell you. Try it on Cloud or GPT or Gemini or any of your preferred solutions. Give it a sample code or make up a code, ask it to generate code, ask it to generate test failures, and then it will be able to speed up. It will be able to tell you, this is the recommended changes. And as a developer or as a tester, all we need to do is basically sit in a human in the loop to say, I approve these 3 changes, and try and test it out, right? Similar with a low-code agent approach that we saw, we also have a coded agent approach. And by this, it's not a product. It's just, for the more hardcore Python developers out there, you can build your own agents in Python. You can deploy it in UiPath through UiPath SDK, publish it, and then you can use it like a UiPath first-party agent, right? So we both support developers who want to use UiPath to build AI agents very simply, or if you want to build your own, or there's a lot of sample GitHub Python agents that you can check out and test, package it up, push it into UiPath, and you can now include it as part of the orchestration. So where I'm leading with this is you've got, so if I zoom out from the demo earlier, on your bottom right, you've got a pathway to say, hey, if the test pass, go and do your custom reporting if you want, some additional complex integration to your Slack or Teams and Jira and things like that. But if it fails and if it's environment related, we can maybe do a reset of test environment, right? If that's something that your testers does today, and just rerun the test again. Okay, I don't know what happened. Let me just rerun everything from the beginning. That's what we do. We can kick that off. But if it's a genuine failure, that's not environment related, that's not data related, let's use that agent, right, on the bottom right. And as part of that, you can see also human involvement, like human in the loop, to say, here's what the agent has recommended for change. And if I approve the change, like if recommended 5, I approve 2, the workflow, what it can do then is potentially go and create a local branch, make the changes, and rerun the test, right? Maybe not from all the way from the top, but maybe from the from the point of failure. And if the second run, if it's executed successfully, we can then mark it as successful. So that's basically probably the last slide that I've got, is that our journey to achieving what we can do today with AI and automation and agentic testing has been long coming. Okay? As in, UiPath has been around for process automation in production for more than about 2 decades. Customers have been using our production-grade automation solutions in testing, which is why about 3.5 years ago, we launched a specific testing product, which basically helps you cater for test design, test automation, execution, and test management. UiPath Test Cloud is the product name. And finally, where we are today is a world of AI agents. And with AI agents, you can see there that you got to involve your automation workflow, your deterministic workflow, and your people as well. And with that, thank you for your time this morning. I hope you learned something from it. And yeah, if any of these resonate with what you're facing today, and if you want to bounce ideas or challenge me on those, feel free to come to our booth. Happy to help you with your problems or just bounce ideas. And hopefully you've got the answers to the questions from my talk as well, because you're going to be winning the prize in a draw.
Thanks, Janati. Want to do the prize?
Oh, yeah. So a question for a $50 gift certificate is, what is the most used functionality within UiPath agentic testing from an orchestration perspective? Is it more a low code or a pro code?
Whoever you think, mate. It's your choice.
Let me try a different question. You got to put your hands up first.
Hands up, then yell. It was very hard to tell.
I'll ask a statistic question then. What are the percentage of people spending time for test failure analysis?
40%.
I saw the lady. I didn't. 32? No? Did you say? Okay.
I'll run it down.
Thank you.